online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Police Scotland have announced no action will be taken against J.K. Rowling for using social media to call trans women men. She hit out against Scotland's new hate crime laws using X and invited the police to arrest her if she'd committed any offence. The Hate Crime and Public Order Act states it's a crime to stir up hatred related to protected characteristics. That includes transgender identity. Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, said the new law would deal with a rising tide of hatred. Rishi Sunak ruled out the law being enforced in England.
Well, look, we're not going to do anything like that here in England. We should not be criminalising people saying common sense things about biological sex. Clearly, that isn't right. We have a proud tradition of free speech, and I think it just shows, whether it's the SNP or the Labour, these are the wrong set of priorities for the country. I'm focused on delivering on the things that really matter to people, and that's why this week we're rolling out free childcare to many more parents. That's an example of us building a brighter future for our country.
Did you support J.K. Rowling's approach?
Again, it's not right for me to comment on police matters, individual matters, but what I do support very strongly is people's right to free speech, and nobody should be criminalised for saying common sense things about biological sex.
Rishi Sunak speaking earlier. So let's welcome now to Drive Thomas Leonard Ross, KC of Benchmark Advocates in Glasgow. Hello to you.
Hi, John.
So, I mean, is this a significant, even a defining decision by Police Scotland?
Well, it didn't seem likely to me that that would have reached the standard for the offence of stirring up hatred. You know, there is a provision in the Act which preserves the right to comment upon matters of this type. And, certainly it could be classified as abusive, but it wouldn't actually be a crime under Section 4 unless, in addition to it being abusive, the intention was to stir up hatred against the group.
Yes, although you can imagine, I suppose, some trans women who are on social media or anywhere else in any public forum told, no, you are a man, and whether you like being described as a man or not, they might consider that to be abusive. So this decision of Police Scotland is defining in that sense.
It is, but, there's been quite a lot of misinformation about the effect of this Act. And those of us who have read it in detail would not have thought that would have met the threshold for the offence of stirring up hatred.
Right, okay. Now, what about the way this law was passed into law? I mean, I'm not a lawyer, you are a leading lawyer. Isn't it Parliament's job to be clear about the intention of a particular statute, or a particular piece of legislation, and not leave important questions like how it's to be applied in such a case as this to the police?
That's an argument. I would point out, John, that so far as racial hatred is concerned, we've had the offence of stirring up racial hatred in Scotland and England since 1965, the Race Relations Act. And I'm personally unaware of a single prosecution in Scotland under that legislation. I read somewhere there might have been 3, and I know that there have been several in England and Wales. But it is a stage above simply being insulting, for example. You know, it's a much higher threshold before any offence could be considered. But ultimately, I suppose it's the same with all offences. You know, the Parliament writes the rules and states what the offence would constitute. But then the police are the ones in the front line who are receiving the complaints from people who then require to match the facts to the law. And I've got to say, I don't envy their task, because this legislation is pretty impossible to understand.
Well, it's pretty much of an indictment coming from a leading King's Counsel, a law that is impossible to understand. So you anticipate further cases in the future where there's simply no knowing until the police come to some sort of determination what's going to happen. Now, that's not good law, is it?
It's terrible law, and actually I have serious doubts whether anybody will ever be prosecuted under it, because all of the ways in which you could contravene this law were already criminal offences in Scotland. You know, we've had quite bad behaviour in Scotland over the years from a variety of different groups. So we have offences which deal with bad behaviour towards groups, and it's likely, I would think, that the prosecutors will choose to bring any prosecutions under the existing laws, which people do understand, rather than this law, which very few people understand.
Is there then, in your opinion, you can only give your opinion as a practitioner, is there something then systemically wrong with the way the Scottish Parliament is operating, is passing law in such an area as this, as a very good example, which, in your view, produces legislation which can't be acted upon, which puts the police in a really difficult position, and which is arguably, I don't know what the opinion polls precisely say, but which is arguably out of kilter with what a lot of Scots say?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a politician, I'm a lawyer, but I think it could be said that a lot of the law which the SNP government has brought in has been sort of policy driven, things that they want to say they've dealt with, and this is the type of area that I suppose you would have predicted that they might get themselves involved in. I mean, there's plenty of things wrong in Scotland. There's plenty areas which have been devolved to the Scottish Parliament, and I know that a lot of people think they'd be better getting on with reducing the drugs deaths, dealing with the huge numbers of people in custody awaiting trial. All of these things are fairly urgent, and I suppose some people will say, well, why are they not getting on with those things rather than bringing in laws which really cover, as I said earlier, cover areas of conduct which are already criminal.
Well, I know you're not a politician, but of course this wasn't just the Scottish National Party in the Scottish Parliament. The Labour group were also behind this. They constitute the bulk of elected members in the Parliament.
Yeah, Lib Dems as well, I think. Yeah, the only people who opposed it were the Scottish Conservatives, and not even the most optimistic Scottish Conservative would think they'll be constituting the next government at Holyrood, so we're stuck with it, I think. It seems highly unlikely that the Labour politicians, the Labour MSPs would vote for it and then repeal it when they come in. But, a lot of people are hoping that they do that. But, if nobody's prosecuted under it, then it might just sort of fade away. The SNP government had a go at this, and they brought in an act to deal with bad behaviour at football, and it caused all sorts of problems, and ultimately nobody was getting charged with it any longer, and they repealed it for that reason, essentially, that it was just really a waste of time. And the same thing could happen with this, but this First Minister's pretty determined that it's not happening while he's in charge.
All right, Thomas, Leonard, Ross, Casey, really interesting to get your thoughts. Now, 1 in 20 patients have been forced